Recording. Oh, I just said recording when I started recording, and that's going to be on the podcast now. I'm just going to leave it. Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. Hey, I'm Heather, and I've got Emma Tempest today. Am I saying your name right? Is it Tempest, or is it
Yes.
like Tempest or something really
No, it's Tempest.
fancy? Okay, I just had a moment of doubt. Clearly, I'm ready for this recording.
Oh, yes, obviously.
So
Hey,
welcome, Emma.
it used to be Chamberlain.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, so like
That's
Tempest is
very,
easier,
very British.
right?
Chamberlain. Well, I've been many other names. Not really, only a couple. Anyway, how about we do a podcast?
Yes, please.
Okay, so Emma and I are going to talk about this quote from Tamar Jacobson's book, Don't Get So Upset, Help Young Children Manage Their Feelings by Understanding Your Own, which is one of the most powerful titles in the history of early childhood books, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And here's what we're going to talk about. Tamar says, there are so few approaches to early childhood that have basic kindness as a point of departure. I call it I'm on your sideness, and sometimes that translates into even if I don't understand you now, I'll never stop trying to.
Yes.
I know, I love it. She's so good.
Oh, good.
But so I read that book a few years ago. Actually, Tiffany Pearsall and I had a reading race. Like, I don't remember what started it, but we did a podcast and we came across this book and then we both ordered it. Like, we hit order at the same time and then we raced to read it. So I highly recommend it. But just that idea that so few of our approaches come from a place of basic kindness floored me because of its truth. And I just, it's been in my brain since then. I think about it all the time.
All the time.
Constantly, it's haunting me. But so I'm glad that we're here to finally talk about it. So that's my response to it. What was your response, Emma?
Similar to yours. It's just the way she says it. It's like a big smack in the face. It's like, duh. Like,
Yeah.
of course. Like, it's
Yeah.
so obvious when you think about it. But I think that's part of the problem, especially in early childhood, is that sometimes we forget to think. We just go through the motions.
Yeah.
And that's not a judgment. That's just a fact. Everybody does it.
Yeah.
And it's that thing of once you get your intentionality back, it just elevates everything. And you can't do that until, well, I don't think you can do that until you get to a point where you're going through the motions becomes detrimental either to yourself or to the children.
Yeah. Or
and
both.
Obviously, yeah, exactly. And kindness is something that you can show yourself, let alone, the children, saying to yourself, oh, maybe I could have handled that situation better, or, rather than just falling down a guilt spiral of shame and, oh, I'm the worst teacher ever, and, oh, I'm never going to be able to do this. You have to show yourself a little kindness. Not everybody's
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Yeah. Be gentle with yourself, but be honest with yourself. I think that you
Yes.
can find that balance.
Yeah.
And I think what reminded me of this quote this time, because I did just post it on the Nerd Facebook page a couple of weeks ago, which sort of reminded me that I'd been wanting to talk to someone on the podcast about it. It was really simple. It was just I shared a blog post on the Nerd page about crisscross applesauce, and had
that blog post.
Yeah. Which also Mike Huber and I just recorded an episode. So by the time this one comes out, people are going to be so tired of hearing about crisscross applesauce. But anyway, I just remember as I was reading the comments, so much of the resistance to the idea of letting go of that tradition was, well, we can't just let the kids have control. And so it just, as I was reading those comments, it reminded me that these folks are so tied into their own reaction.
Oh yeah.
And their own habits in their practice, that they're not being intentionally unkind, but their
it's
response
ingrained.
it's ingrained, absolutely, and it's cultural in our field.
Mm.
And so often our response to child-centered suggestions, I'll say, or thinking in terms of developmental needs and not teacher needs um, is
We've always
it,
done it this
it
way.
right, and it becomes an example of this quote about, let's just stop and think about what if our goal was just to be kind to each other. Would that change how we
Right.
approach the way they have their bodies when we're doing a
Mm-hmm.
group time, um, or the way that we respond to behavior kinds of
Yeah,
stuff?
totally.
It could change everything about our practice if we stopped and just said, what if I reframed this
Yeah.
just
And
in terms of basic kindness?
it's the same thing when people say, oh, well, licensing says we can't, or, oh, well, my director says we can't. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, well, they may say that, but what's to stop you questioning it? What's to
Mm-hmm.
stop you really looking deeper at exactly the wording of the licensing document?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe if you can't do that, go down a step on the ladder and what can you do? Because
Mm-hmm.
those little incremental changes add up to big things. And if you can't even see kindness as an option,
Right.
it's part of the system. I think it's just that we've got so much to do and so
Mm-hmm.
little time, and you just feel like, and I'm saying like the royal we, you
Yes,
just
yes.
feel like everything depends on you. And as the teacher standing in front of the class having important things to say,
Mm-hmm.
you can kind of see why teachers feel like it is on them. And then you get people like licensing, or people who come in to observe, or parents who come to tour the classroom to see if they want their kid to be there. I can see why people think they have to put on a certain, I don't want to say performance as
Mm-hmm.
such, but a certain show.
Yeah, I think I've said a, a couple of, I've said often, I'll just say that because I don't have measurable data on how often I've said this. Sorry, but we have to find a different way to define our success as teachers. It can't be control and structure and what it looks like to outsiders. That can't be our measuring point of whether or not we're good teachers and have a good quality classroom. And I think that's where some of what you're describing comes from too, is we feel that pressure to
Mm-hmm.
always appear like we're in control.
We
And
can't.
if we stop to just be kind to each other, then we have to let go of some of that. And that's really scary.
Mm-hmm. I just had a little thought pop up in my head. Excuse me, it's not quite fully formed
All
yet.
right.
But what you were saying then about how, oh, maybe I need to think on this a little bit
Oh,
longer. I'm
that'll be
sorry.
good podcast. We'll just sit
Well, it will
and
if I think of
think.
it. No, I was just wondering then about how that need to feel in control and feel like you're a good teacher because certain things are going a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious now because when I see, hang on, let me see if I can get this right. When I
Mm-hmm.
see other teachers and people who work with children try to be like that, the children are always the ones who book that trend. They're the ones who, if you're trying to gain control of everyone at circle time because you think that makes you a good teacher, I can pretty much guarantee, maybe like 99.9% of the time, there's going to be one kid that can't follow that through. Does that
Mm-hmm.
make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's almost like by trying to be that controlled, they end up having less control because that's not how kids respond.
Right. Right. And then uh the one, the child who needs our kindness in that moment instead gets labeled as a behavior problem.
Yes.
And we've again, I don't think any of us are thinking, well, I'm going to choose
To be unkind.
control over kindness in this moment because that's what teachers do. But I think so many of our catchphrases and the buzzwords and the traditional practices.
They just default to
default to conformity and standardization, which requires sort of dehumanization.
So that's what I mean. Like, if you have a class of 20 children, and like if we're going to measure it, and 20 of them are sitting enjoying circle time, that could be because you're a very engaging teacher. And if they're sitting, as in sitting down, lying down, wriggling, moving, they can still be engaged. So how, as an outsider, can you measure which teacher is more engaging if what you're judging them on is the control that children have on their bodies? That doesn't make any sense to me, but people do it all the time.
Absolutely. Add that to the list of many things that don't make sense in our field and practice, but that we cling to anyway. I mean, I'm not saying that pressure doesn't feel real and that it's not stressful. But I mean, and there have been times that I have said no to someone wanting to come in and observe my class or my practice, because I know that I won't have the opportunity to talk it through with them and help them process what and sort of articulate my practice. But we have to be able to do that. I mean, we do have to be able to articulate the practice, and that's where our skill comes in, not in controlling the group, but in being able to validate our choices. And
but that circles back to being kind to yourself and having that reflection piece, because if you're not taking the time to work out why whatever happened, good or bad, I'm doing air quotes on a podcast, what am I doing? But it's that thing of, if you're not willing to be vulnerable and willing to open up about why you made those choices, if you're just too quick to defend yourself, it implies that you're doing something wrong. I nearly did it again then. Wrong.
So for the rest of the podcast, when Emma says wrong, just imagine air quotes.
But that's what, do you know what I mean? No, it's like, if you're too busy just blaming the children for everything that's going on and not being kind to them, you're not being kind to yourself, because you're assuming that a child whose brain hasn't fully formed yet has control over you, which is quite scary when you think about it.
Or malicious intent toward you.
Right.
Like, that's the one that blows my mind, is so many people willing to see a 3-year-old child as malicious and manipulative. The
way people think about stuff like that, and this applies to any thought about anything ever, is your thoughts create your feelings about a situation.
Absolutely.
So if you're thinking, oh, this child is, it hates me, and I don't know how to connect with them, and oh, they're always so rude to me, or whatever, you're going to feel a certain way about that child, and then that child is going to pick up on that, and the child's actions will result in you hating that child, and you disrespecting them, and you doing all those things that you just said about that child. You end up creating for yourself
and modeling for others. I mean, that's true. So also, side note, now when we tag this episode, we can just include everything ever as one of the tags, because you just covered it all. So but
it's true.
It is true. And so I want to I kind of wanted to go down the road of talking about kindness to each other also as adults working with children. And you kind of gave a good lead there when you're talking about when we're talking about what other people are thinking, because there's an aspect of this too where we need to think about the relationships we have with the people who might be either in our classrooms with us or supervising us, or that we are supervising, and that there needs to be an element of emotional safety for this all to work. These kinds of things that we're talking about, which again comes from a place of kindness. And I don't always see that, and I have certainly not always felt that in terms of coworkers or supervisors.
No, completely. I think it links back to the vulnerability piece
Yeah,
again,
yeah.
in that if you witness a coworker doing something, or if a coworker tells you something about a child that you either don't see, or you can understand where they're coming from because that child does not have a connection with that person, but they do with you, you can be seen as that, godlike Mary Poppins magical figure, like, oh, well, why do they behave well with you and not with me? And
Yeah.
it's not about what behavior is the result of their action. It's about the connection. And it's about the fact that if you were just kind, just paused and stopped to think of what a kind action or a kind word could do, it completely can change the whole situation around. And
Yeah.
especially, like you said, when it comes to adults, having those kind moments towards those people who are having a hard time. Like, we talk about children who are having a hard time and not giving us a hard time.
Right.
So if the adult is having a hard time, maybe we need to be kind to them too, and think, well, maybe something's going on with them that's causing them to lose this connection, or something's happening at home, or I remember going to work and my colleagues saying, hey, you okay? And I'd be like, yeah, I'm fine. And they'd know something was wrong with me before I did.
Yeah. Then you're like, wait, what are they seeing? What?
Yeah, but they picked up on all those little cues that I gave off, because I was trying to do I'm the teacher, I'm in control, I'll leave my stuff from home at home. And it's just not physically possible to do that, especially 100% of the time, because it's exhausting. It physically and mentally drains you. So if you have that one person who says, hey, you okay, that can completely change the whole course of your day. And I have amazing teaching assistants who would make me cups of tea, and we'd have cake for breakfast, and super kind things. But it is that key point of just thinking instead of reacting, and just taking that little tiny pause to just think, how can I be kind in this situation, rather than just that initial reaction of it's almost like a reflex, I guess. And we need to train our brains to reflex to be kind.
Right. Or just to train ourselves to just be real people together, instead of this idea that we have of teachers and not teachers, or whatever role we're assigning to someone changes our expectations or changes the way we interact with them. But if we could just think of ourselves as all being human beings together in this specific situation, which in my case is with a group of children, and some other adults around who are also there to help the children, for some reason adding those labels changes the lens and changes our practice and our expectations. But if we can just start to train ourselves to think of each other as people, then kindness becomes much more real. Like, it's more of a reality that we could just be kind, and that
and
our decisions and choices and expectations come from that place, instead of.
If that's what you're modeling in your classroom, then it becomes a culture. It becomes the norm that, in this classroom, we are kind. It's not just a phrase that you have stuck up on a wall.
Yeah.
It's a way of life. Like, it sounds really cheesy. But if we want the next generation to be nicer to each other, we have to do it ourselves. You can't just expect them to do it because it's one of the 5 rules that are posted up on the wall.
Right. So if, there's a conflict and one child hits another child, and we step in and say, that wasn't kind, or you need to be kind. Well, what about trying to understand the perspective, or trying to see the situation and why it happened? I mean, I think that's kindness too, understanding that there's not a good guy and a bad guy in this preschool situation where one has hit the other. There's a problem that we need to look at. And so it's another example, I think, where we use language without really showing what it means. We talk about kindness and we tell them to be kind, but then like what we're acting is not.
Yeah, but it's not like they don't know. It's not like they go, oh, this is kind, punch. Like, they know it's not kind,
right?
But they don't necessarily know why they're doing it, or what to do instead, or how the person who is the recipient of that punch,
right,
what they could have done instead,
or
there's
have
so
the
many layers.
self-control to make a different choice.
Yes, exactly. There's so many layers to it, and I just think jumping to a conclusion doesn't help anybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sorry, I was trying not to repeat myself. I was going to go back to that, people who comment on Facebook blogs or whatever about how we can't just let kids do what we want, and this is why we have problems because we're too soft on them. And
But that's the
no,
thing. We need
that's
to then
not.
be kind. But then we need to be kind to them
Yeah.
and think,
To the
well,
people who are saying that, you mean?
yeah,
We need to be kind to them. Yeah.
yeah. It's hard because
Yeah.
you just want to like strangle them through the screen, like,
Mhm.
oh, why do you not get it?
Yeah.
But there's a reason why they think that, just like there's a reason why we think the opposite.
Mm-hmm. Yes, agreed. I'm nodding now. We have
I
air
know,
quotes and nodding.
nodding.
We need a sound effect or something. We could do a little ding when there's an
Yeah.
air quote and a rattle when there's a nod.
Well, a rattle would be better for no.
For no?
Shaking
Okay.
the head, no. But
But
yes,
we'll work on that.
The Kool-Aid cup thing. Going, oh yeah.
What?
The big cup thing that bursts through the wall.
Yes, that's the Kool-Aid man.
Yes,
It's a pitcher.
That's the word I wanted.
Yeah, yeah. That's what we need when we're nodding, you mean? That's the sound
because he
effect we
goes,
need?
oh yeah.
Yeah, all right. Sorry, I was clearly not following the stream of conversation that I started. Oh my goodness. So, well, what else do I want to say about this? It's one of those quotes that when I read it, I was like, yep, and that's all that needs to be said. But also I want to talk to somebody about it.
But I think it's just seeing all those cheesy quotes and all those rules that we have about be kind, and not just assuming that you understand what that means, and taking the time to reflect and dissect it and talk with your colleagues about it. Because if you have people who, I know we keep linking it back to behavior, but that just, to me, that just makes sense in the context of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
If you have a colleague or somebody, parent, whoever, who's saying, oh, this child's behavior, blah, 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 it's usually, if they're making it about them, as in the adult, we can take that time to be kind and say, hey, can I invite you to engage in a discussion about this? Excuse me. Because I sound like I've been smoking. I don't know what's going on. Because if you are, and I'm all for a good bitching session, don't get me wrong.
Right. I can totally get on board with that too.
Right. But it's moving past that as an initial reaction, and actually what can we do about this situation?
Yeah.
And if the tiniest incremental 1% movement towards something is to be kind, then I'm all for that.
Yeah.
Whether it's to yourself, like don't be so hard on yourself, or whether it's to the child, maybe they're having a bad day, even if it's something that's not necessarily true. Like, you don't know what's going on in anybody's head.
Right.
So why not just be kind?
Yeah. It's I would think that it would be easier, but I'm sure for some people it would feel scary and hard. Because
that's the vulnerability piece
again.
again.
Yeah.
Brene Brown says it best. You can't be courageous without being scared. Courage doesn't exist without you being scared and worried and anxious, because otherwise you wouldn't need it. And I just think it takes a lot of practice to be able to reflect that deeply.
Yeah.
And then even more practice to change whatever it is that you are reflecting on.
Yeah. So we didn't do this at the beginning. Maybe it's valuable to do it now, but if we had to define kindness.
Oh.
So I'm thinking about this now because we just were talking about using the word, and are we really showing children what the word really means? And
I think for me personally, I guess I haven't really thought about it in the terms of a definition, but as a way of life, I
Mhm.
guess it's using that process of, well, my thoughts create my feelings and they create my
Yeah.
action, and my actions create my result. I guess it's just trying to stop that flow
Yeah.
and actually choose which path you want to take, so you can react or you can act intentionally.
Yeah.
And hopefully, the more, when you think about brain development and synapses, the more you go down that path, the stronger it gets.
Right.
So
You change the wiring.
right, so it does become, that's your reaction.
Yeah. 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 So, and I, I just think about if I wanted someone who's working with young children to have an approach that is grounded in basic human kindness, or whatever the quote said, trying to think about what that might mean, I would want them to, be able to have that, stop that process and be more aware of what's going on, but also just perspective taking, just stopping
Mm-hmm.
to think, okay, so why do I think that just happened, or what might they need from me, or what could they be thinking or feeling, or what was
I
their
think
goal, and just trying to practice that, it's not all about me and it's not all about the group.
that's what I was just going to say. The key point, what you just said there, was it's about what they need and what
Mm-hmm.
you can do.
Mm-hmm.
And if kindness is a vehicle you can use to get to that place, then great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then there's the more concrete kinds of things that are like, well, I can, if I'm someone who uses sarcasm with young children, I can maybe stop using sarcasm. Or if I'm one who stands and talks about children with a coworker over their head as if they don't exist, about all the
Mm-hmm.
things they're doing that are driving me crazy, maybe I could stop that. That doesn't seem very kind.
Right. And again, there's nothing, I don't want people to hear this and think, well, what are we supposed to do? Just be happy and kind all the
Yeah.
time. Like,
Right.
yeah. But it's that,
Eventually, but not right away.
but it's the tweaks. It's the, if you
Yeah.
picture it, like I said, as a ladder, if you know that you have a coworker who engages you in that kind of conversation, being kind to them, not just shutting them down and being like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, well, Emma and Heather said that they're a terrible person, so next time they start talking about the kids, I'm just going to tell them to shut up.
Right.
Not so much that, and not too far the other way in terms of saying to them, oh, but don't forget, he's only 3, or blah, 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 and just making them feel completely unheard. It's
Mm-hmm.
the same thing we want you to do with children. We want you to be kind to that adult just
Yeah.
as you would a child.
Yeah. I've I've sometimes, it doesn't always work because we're all, there's emotions involved in all of these kinds of conversations too. But sometimes might just say, well, so I'm wondering about her perspective in this, or I'm wondering
Mm-hmm.
how she feels when that happens, and just sort of shifting it that way. So we can still talk about the problem or the issue or the
Mm-hmm.
frustration, but it changes the tone just a little bit. But yeah, I get relationship. If I have a good relationship with that person, that approach goes better than if it's someone who sees me as an adversary and then I say,
Yeah,
well, I'm wondering about a different perspective. That's
yeah.
not going to go as far.
And adults are not like, they can pick up on those little subtleties. But if you're so ingrained in that way of thought, having somebody say, oh, I wonder if you want to talk about this later on over coffee, or oh, well, I can't talk about this right now because it's nap time and they need to get waken up, but I really want to engage with you later
Mm-hmm.
on.
Yeah,
It doesn't come across as condescending, because actually
because
you're
it's a
doing
real
what,
reason.
yeah, and you're doing what we want people to do with children. We want
Uh-huh.
them to feel validated. We want them to be heard. We want them to express their thoughts and feelings without somebody saying, well, that's not
Yeah.
quite true. And it's really frustrating, especially when you feel like you know better,
Mm-hmm.
and you feel like, oh, well, I know what I'd do in that situation, but you don't. You only
Right.
know to a certain degree.
You
And
know
I
what you
just think,
think you might do.
right,
Or what
exactly.
you hope
Every
you might
child,
do.
children are children, but everyone is unique and individual and, different. And I
Mm-hmm.
just feel like if we don't offer kindness as a tool to everybody, then we've got no chance of offering it to children.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to start with you. And if in that moment you are so angry and upset at what somebody else is saying or doing, then be kind to yourself and just give yourself that time to, chill with your thoughts, feel your
Mm-hmm.
feelings, all those kind of cheesy quotes that we say.
Yeah.
But they're cheesy for a reason, because they're true.
No, and I'm glad that because I had sort of course, planned to talk about kindness to children and had thought about kindness to each other as colleagues or whatever in the situation, but I hadn't thought about that side of it, of being kind to yourself, and that being an approach that we can take. So I'm glad that you brought that in.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Well, I didn't say thank you. I just said I was glad. But thank you. So what would you send them out with as like a parting admonition for being kind? Just go forth and be kind.
Well, yeah, it sounds so cheesy, but I think for me the key, if I could say one thing that I'd want people to think about,
Mm-hmm.
is that knee-jerk reaction of when you see someone else connecting with a child, or when you see somebody else being kind, when you would maybe choose another road. And I'm not
Mm-hmm.
meaning choose the unkind road, but
Right.
when you hear those conversations where people say, oh, well, how are they ever going to learn to do this, this, and this if she's letting them do this? Or if she's just going to give him a hug when he's sad, how's he going to learn that that's
Right.
not okay, or whatever? It's so hard to stop that thought train. So maybe just to give yourself that kindness in actually becoming more aware that you're even on that train.
Mm-hmm.
And it might be a bit of a runaway train, but you don't know. You don't know that you're on it until somebody makes you aware of it.
Yeah.
So maybe the key is for those people who are on the train to just take a look out the window and see which stop you're at. And for those people who are watching the train go past and that person's just running away with it, maybe chase after the train and try and get it to halt, or at least
Yeah.
put some leaves on the line or something. Like, just slow it down is what I'm trying to say, because
Right.
you can't stop it. I don't think you can. I think it has to come from that person, but
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't mean we can't help.
Yeah. Yeah. And that the train analogy, I think, is good, even though it was funny. It can be both. It's
It
good and
always helps
funny.
when analogies are funny.
Good and funny. Yeah, sure it does. Okay, so thank you, Emma. I want to wrap this up, but so I know that the listeners have heard me and other guests talk about Tamar Jacobs until they're probably sick of it. But this book is really good because it does really walk you through how to become more aware of your own reactions and feelings, and how that informs then the way you respond to children, and matches kind of what you've been describing. So I just want to put a plug out for that too. All right, thanks, Emma.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for listening to another episode. We'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.